The blood soaked through his shirt in 3 places, and Rose Adler knew if she didn't stop the bleeding in the next few minutes, the first person to walk through her clinic door would also be the first to die in it. She pressed her hands against the worst wound on his abdomen, the ramshackle walls of the abandoned shack around her seeming to close in as the cowboy's breath came in shallow gasps. This wasn't how she had imagined her first day as a physician in Jerome Junction, Arizona would begin, but the year was 1878, and nothing about the Arizona Territory went according to plan. "Stay with me," she said firmly, her voice steadier than her hands. "I didn't spend 6 years learning medicine in Philadelphia just to lose my first patient before I've even unpacked my supplies." The cowboy's eyes fluttered open, revealing irises the color of whiskey held up to sunlight. Despite the pain etched across his sun-weathered face, something like amusement flickered there. "Glad to know I'm making history, madam." His voice was rough as desert sand, each word clearly costing him effort. Rose didn't waste breath on a response. She had arrived in Jerome Junction exactly 14 hours ago, stepping off the stagecoach with 2 trunks of medical equipment, a head full of determination, and precisely $43 to her name. The mining town perched precariously on Mingus Mountain had exactly 0 physicians, which was 43 more problems than doctors. The only available building had been this abandoned prospector's shack on the edge of town, its wood weathered gray and its roof questionable in at least 5 places. She had spent the night cleaning mouse droppings and hanging canvas over the broken windows, telling herself that morning would bring clarity and hope. Instead, morning had brought Quentin Shaw, shot 3 times and bleeding onto the floor she had just scrubbed. "I need to get the bullets out," she said, already moving to her medical trunk. Her fingers found the instruments by feel, the familiar weight of surgical tools grounding her spiraling thoughts. "This is going to hurt. Can't hurt worse than getting shot." Quentin tried to shift on the makeshift examination table, which was actually just her second trunk laid on its side and covered with her cleanest sheet. He winced, his face going a shade paler. "Don't move," Rose commanded, returning with her instruments and a bottle of whiskey she had purchased specifically for sterilization purposes. She poured it liberally over her hands and the tools, then met his eyes. "Bite down on this." She offered him a leather strap. He took it but didn't put it in his mouth yet. "You really a doctor?" "I really am." She began cutting away his shirt, revealing a muscled torso that bore several old scars alongside the new wounds. This man had been shot before, maybe more than once. "University of Pennsylvania Medical School, graduated top of my class. Now bite down before you lose more blood arguing with me." Something shifted in his expression, a softness that seemed incongruous with the hardness of his features. He put the leather between his teeth. Rose had performed surgery exactly 17 times, all under the supervision of attending physicians in Philadelphia's teaching hospital. She had never done it alone, in a shack that smelled of pine sap and copper dust, with morning light streaming through canvas-covered windows. But her hands knew what to do, and her mind cataloged each step with crystalline clarity. First bullet, lodged in the muscle of his left shoulder. She extracted it cleanly, dropped it into a tin cup where it landed with a decisive ping. Second bullet, through and through on his right side, just above the hip. She irrigated the wound, packed it with clean cloth. Third bullet, the dangerous one, embedded in his abdomen but blessedly shallow, having been slowed by a belt buckle that now sported a dramatic dent. Quentin made sounds through the leather strap that would have been screams in another man, but he didn't move except for the involuntary tensing of his muscles. Rose worked with focused intensity, aware of his pain, but unable to let it distract her. The wounded needed her steady, needed her confident, needed her to be the physician she had fought so hard to become. When the third bullet joined its companions in the tin cup, she allowed herself one long breath before starting the suturing. Her professor's voice echoed in her memory, small, even stitches, tight enough to hold but not so tight they tear. She worked methodically, closing each wound with careful precision. The morning sun climbed higher, turning the shack into an oven, but she didn't pause to wipe the sweat from her forehead until the last knot was tied. "All done," she said, finally stepping back. Her dress was ruined, the sensible gray cotton now decorated with dark stains. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured more whiskey over them, the delayed reaction setting in now that the crisis had passed. Quentin removed the leather strap from his mouth. "Thank you." 2 words, but they carried the weight of a man who understood exactly how close he had come to dying. "Don't thank me yet. Infection is still a risk." Rose moved to wash her instruments in the basin of water she had boiled before dawn. "You'll need to stay here for observation, at least a week, maybe 2. "Can't do that." She turned to face him, eyebrows raised. "You can and you will. Unless you want those wounds to open up again, or worse, turn septic. I've seen men die from less. The men who shot me are still out there." Quentin's jaw set in a stubborn line. "They find out I'm alive, they'll come finish the job. I won't bring that down on you." "This is a medical clinic now," Rose said firmly, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. The shack didn't look like much, but it was hers, and she'd be damned if she let anyone dictate how she ran it. "You're under my care, which means you're under my protection. Besides, do you even know who shot you?" The question hung in the air. Quentin's expression darkened. "3 men from the Copper King Mining Company caught me on the road from Prescott. They didn't bother with introductions before they started shooting." Rose had heard of Copper King. Everyone in Jerome Junction worked for one of 2 mines, Copper King or the smaller, struggling Desert Rose operation. The rivalry between them was bitter, occasionally violent. "Why would they target you?" "Because I was riding for Desert Rose, carrying payroll." Quentin's hand moved instinctively to his side where a leather satchel should have been. His face went even paler. "The money. Did you see a saddlebag when they brought me in?" "No one brought you in. You walked through my door, bled on my floor, and collapsed." Rose moved to check his pupils, professional concern overriding the shock of his revelation. "You rode here after being shot 3 times, walked, horse spooked." Each word came slower now, exhaustion claiming him. "The payroll. 2 months' wages for every man at Desert Rose. Without it, they can't pay the workers. Mine will shut down." Rose's mind raced through the implications. A failed payroll delivery, 3 gunshot wounds, and the delicate economic balance of a mining town that depended on competition between 2 companies to keep wages fair. She didn't know much about mining politics, but she knew enough about human nature to understand that desperate men did desperate things. "We'll deal with the payroll situation after you've rested. Right now, your body needs to heal. You don't understand." Quentin tried to sit up, made it approximately 3 inches before Rose pushed him firmly back down. "I understand that you've lost a significant amount of blood, and your body is in shock. I understand that if you don't rest, you will die, and then your payroll problems become considerably less relevant." She pulled a thin blanket over him, noting the way his eyes were already starting to glaze with fever. The infection she had worried about was likely already taking hold. "Sleep. I'll watch over you." "Stubborn woman," he mumbled, but his eyes were closing. "Stubborn physician," Rose corrected, allowing herself a small smile. "There's a difference." She spent the rest of that first day monitoring his fever, which spiked to dangerous levels by afternoon. Rose applied cool cloths to his forehead. forced him to drink willow bark tea whenever he surfaced to consciousness, and changed his bandages twice. Between these tasks, she continued organizing her clinic, hanging her medical degree on the wall in a frame that had somehow survived the stagecoach journey unscathed. Dr. Rose Adler, it proclaimed in formal script, and seeing it there made something in her chest expand with pride and terror in equal measure. As sunset painted the Arizona sky in shades of copper and gold, someone knocked on the clinic door. Rose opened it to find a grizzled man in his 60s, his face creased with concern and his hat clutched in weathered hands. "Heard there's a doctor in town now," he said. "Name's Frank Morrison, foreman at Desert Rose, looking for one of my men." Quentin Shaw was supposed to arrive back yesterday with the payroll. When he didn't show, I sent riders out. They found blood on the Prescott Road, signs of an ambush. Rose made a decision in the space of a heartbeat. "He's here. He's alive, but he was shot 3 times. I've extracted the bullets and sutured the wounds, but he's fighting a fever now." Relief flooded Frank's features. "Thank God. Can I see him?" Briefly. "He needs rest more than anything." Rose stepped aside to let him enter, watching as the older man approached the makeshift examination table where Quentin lay sweating and pale. "Damn fool," Frank said, but his voice was thick with emotion. "Should have sent more guards with him." He looked at Rose. "The payroll." He said the saddlebag was taken. "I'm sorry." Frank's shoulders sagged. "That's 2 months' wages for 47 men. Most of them have families. Without that money, I'll have to shut down operations, and Copper King will have the whole mountain to themselves." He rubbed his face. "Not your problem, though. You just worry about keeping Quentin alive. Desert Rose will pay his medical bills, whatever they are." "I'm more concerned about payment in medicine and supplies," Rose said honestly. "I used a significant portion of my laudanum on him, and I'm low on several other essentials. The nearest pharmaceutical supply is in Prescott, and I haven't had time to arrange for regular shipments. I'll have one of my men ride out tomorrow with a list of what you need. Desert Rose takes care of its own, and Quentin is one of the best men I've got." Frank settled his hat back on his head. "You did good work, Dr. Adler. This town's lucky to have you." After he left, Rose sat in the one chair she owned, a rickety thing she had found abandoned in the corner, and allowed herself to feel the full weight of the day. 24 hours ago, she had been on a stagecoach, rehearsing the speech she would give to announce her new practice. Now she was embroiled in mine politics, had performed emergency surgery, and was providing care to a man who apparently had enemies willing to shoot him on sight. "Some first day," she muttered to the empty room. Then she stood, checked Quentin's fever again, and settled in for what promised to be a long night. The fever broke 3 days later. Rose had dozed off in her chair sometime near dawn, her head pillowed on her arms at the small table she had designated as her desk. She woke to the sound of movement and found Quentin sitting up, actually sitting up, looking weak but substantially more alive than he had any right to be. "You should be lying down," she said, her professional instincts overriding her grogginess. "Been lying down for 3 days, from what I can piece together." His voice was stronger, though still rough. "Figured it was time to test if my legs remember how to work. Your legs can wait. Your abdomen, however, is full of stitches that would very much like you to remain still." Rose stood, moving to check his wounds. The inflammation had decreased significantly, the angry red fading to a healthier pink. "You're healing well, but that doesn't mean you can start dancing. Wasn't planning on it." Quentin watched her work with an intensity that made Rose acutely aware of how close she was standing, how her fingers pressed against his bare skin. "You stayed, all 3 days." "Of course I stayed. You're my patient." Rose stepped back, suddenly needing distance. And before you ask again about leaving, the answer is still no. At least another week of observation. The payroll is gone, according to Frank Morrison. He's been by twice to check on you. Desert Rose is shutting down operations temporarily until they can arrange new funding. Rose moved to the small stove she had set up in the corner where a pot of broth had been simmering. For now, you need to eat. Your body can't heal without fuel. Quentin accepted the bowl she brought him, their fingers brushing in the exchange. You're different from the doctors I've known. Because I'm a woman. Rose tried to keep the defensiveness from her voice, failed. Because you're here. He took a careful sip of the broth. Most educated folks who come to Jerome Junction take one look at the dust and the danger and turn right back around, but you stayed. Set up a clinic in a shack that looks like a strong wind could blow it over. Why? Rose was silent for a long moment, considering how much to reveal to this man she barely knew. But there was something about Quentin Shaw, something in the directness of his gaze and the respect in his tone that made her want to be honest. Because in Philadelphia, I was a novelty. The woman doctor, good for a curious glance but not trusted with anything serious. The patients who did see me questioned every decision, every diagnosis. I spent 6 years proving I was as good as my male classmates, and it didn't matter. I'd always be less than in their eyes. She met his gaze. Out here, I thought maybe competence would matter more than gender. Does it? I don't know yet. You're my first patient. Rose allowed herself a small smile. Though you're setting a high bar for drama, Quentin laughed, then immediately regretted it, his hand going to his abdomen. Don't make me laugh, it hurts. Then stop asking questions that prompt honest answers. Rose took his empty bowl. Now rest. Actual rest, lying down, not asking philosophical questions about my life choices. Over the following days, a routine established itself. Rose would wake before dawn, check Quentin's wounds, change his bandages, and make sure he ate. Then she would open the clinic door to the handful of other patients who had started trickling in, drawn by word of mouth that a real doctor had set up practice in Jerome Junction. She treated a child's broken arm, lanced an infected wound on a miner's hand, diagnosed consumption in a saloon girl who cried with relief at finally having a name for her suffering. Between patients, Rose found herself talking with Quentin more than was strictly professional. He told her about growing up in Texas, learning to ride before he could properly walk, losing his parents to cholera when he was 16. He had drifted west, working cattle drives and ranch hand jobs until he ended up in Arizona territory, drawn by the promise of steady work in the mines. He had started as a laborer at Desert Rose, but worked his way up to supervisor through a combination of hard work and an apparently natural talent for reading rock formations. Frank says I've got a gift for knowing where the copper veins run, Quentin said one afternoon while Rose was checking his stitches. Personally, I think it's just paying attention. Most folks are in too much of a hurry to notice what the mountain's telling them. What is the mountain telling them? Rose asked, genuinely curious. That you can't just take without giving something back, that every tunnel you dig changes the shape of things, sometimes in ways you can't predict. His eyes tracked her movements as she worked. That some things are worth the risk, even when the odds aren't in your favor. Rose felt heat rise in her cheeks and busied herself with retying his bandage more tightly than strictly necessary. Hold still. Yes, madam. The amusement in his voice was unmistakable. A week into his recovery, Frank Morrison returned to the clinic with news. He found Rose outside, attempting to repair a section of the roof that had started leaking during a brief rain shower the night before. Need help with that? Frank called up to where she balanced precariously on a ladder. I need someone who knows what they're doing with a hammer, Rose admitted, climbing down. I'm significantly better with a scalpel. Frank took over the repairs while they talked. Got word from Prescott. Copper King is buying out Desert Rose. Without the payroll, we couldn't make our loan payment to the bank. Copper King swooped in with a cash offer for the whole operation. Rose felt her stomach sink. What happens to the workers? Copper King says they'll keep on anyone who wants to stay, but at their wages, which are 30% lower than what Desert Rose was paying. Frank hammered a nail with more force than necessary. It's a monopoly now. They control all the copper on this mountain, which means they control the whole town. They can set wages as low as they want, charge whatever they like at the company store. Workers won't have any choice but to accept it. That's not right. No, it's not, but it's legal. Frank climbed down from the ladder. Quentin taking the news okay, I haven't told him yet. Wanted to wait until you could explain it properly. Rose looked toward the clinic. He's going to blame himself. He should blame the men who shot him. Speaking of which, Sheriff came by my office this morning. Said there's not enough evidence to pursue the case. Funny how that works when Copper King owns half the territory government. Rose had met Jerome Junction's sheriff exactly once, a portly man named Hutchins who seemed far more interested in collecting fees than enforcing justice. So the men who did this just get away with it. Welcome to Arizona territory, Dr. Adler. Out here, justice is often less about what's right and more about who's got the most money. Frank tipped his hat. I should get going. Got to figure out how to tell 47 men they're about to take a pay cut. You let me know if you need anything else for the clinic. Rose found Quentin sitting up in bed, reading a battered copy of Ivanhoe she had loaned him from her small personal library. He looked up as she entered, and she watched his expression shift as he read the news on her face. How bad? He asked simply. She told him everything. He listened in silence, his jaw tightening but his eyes remaining steady. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. I should have been faster, should have seen the ambush coming, should have done something different. His hands clenched into fists on the blanket. You should have had a proper escort for that amount of money, Rose said firmly. You should have been protected by competent law enforcement. You should be living in a world where companies don't resort to armed robbery to eliminate competition. None of this is your fault, Quentin. Feels like my fault. 47 families are about to suffer because I couldn't deliver one saddlebag safely. Rose sat down on the edge of the bed, a liberty she wouldn't have taken a week ago. Those families are going to suffer because of greed and corruption. You nearly died trying to prevent that. There's a difference between failing and being defeated by impossible odds. He looked at her then, really looked, and Rose felt something shift in the air between them. You're a remarkable woman, Rose Adler. I'm a practical woman who doesn't believe in wasting time on self-recrimination when there's work to be done. But her voice came out softer than she intended. Besides, you're still healing. Stress is bad for recovery. Is that your medical opinion? It is. Then I'll try to follow doctor's orders. His hand moved, almost unconsciously, to rest near hers on the blanket, not touching but close enough that she could feel the heat of his skin. Even though following orders isn't exactly my strong suit, I've noticed. Rose stood, needing to move before she did something unprofessional like close the distance between their hands. I'm going to make dinner. You're going to rest. Tomorrow, if you're feeling strong enough, maybe you can sit outside for a bit. Fresh air is good for healing. That night, Rose lay on her bedroll in the corner of the clinic's main room and listened to Quentin's steady breathing from across the space. She had draped a canvas curtain to give them both some privacy, but the shack was small enough that she could hear every shift of his body, every quiet sigh. She told herself the awareness was purely medical, a doctor monitoring her patient's condition. She told herself the warmth spreading through her chest when he said her name was simple gratification at doing her job well. She told herself a lot of things in the darkness and didn't believe any of them. The next morning dawned clear and hot, the Arizona sun already burning away the cool of night by the time Rose opened the clinic door. She helped Quentin outside, supporting his weight as he took slow, careful steps to the rough bench she had positioned in the shade of a struggling juniper tree. "God, I miss this," he said, tilting his face to the sky. "No offense to your clinic, but I was starting to feel like a caged animal." "None taken. I'd feel the same way." Rose settled beside him, closer than necessary given the length of the bench. "Though I should warn you, sitting outside means you're visible to anyone passing by. If you're worried about those Copper King men, let them come. I'm not hiding." Quentin's voice carried a hard edge. "Besides, they got what they wanted. Desert Rose is finished." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the town wake up around them. Jerome Junction clung to the side of Mingus Mountain like a barnacle, its buildings seeming to defy gravity as they perched on terrace slopes. Miners emerged from boarding houses, heading toward the tunnel entrances that scarred the mountainside. Women hung washing on lines strung between buildings. A dog barked somewhere in the distance, the sound carrying in the thin mountain air. "Tell me about Philadelphia," Quentin said after a while. "What made you want to be a doctor?" Rose considered the question. She had answered it dozens of times for admissions committees and skeptical professors, always with the same practice speech about service and healing. But sitting here with Quentin, she found herself reaching for the truth. "My mother died when I was 12. She'd been sick for months, and the doctors kept giving her different treatments, different diagnoses. None of them listened when she tried to tell them about her symptoms. They just patted her hand and told her not to worry, that women's complaints were often exaggerated." Rose felt the old anger rising, familiar as breathing. By the time they figured out it was her appendix, it was too late. She died from something completely treatable because she wasn't taken seriously. Quentin's hand found hers, his fingers warm and solid. "I'm sorry. I decided that day that I would become the kind of doctor who listened, who took every patient seriously, regardless of gender or station." Rose looked down at their joined hands. "My father thought I was crazy, said no medical school would accept a woman, but I was stubborn." "I've noticed," Quentin said, echoing her words from days earlier. His thumb traced small circles on her palm, and Rose wondered if he knew he was doing it. "What happened after you graduated?" "I tried to establish a practice in Philadelphia." "Put up a shingle." Dr. Rose Adler, Medical and Surgical Services. "I got exactly 3 patients in 6 months. 2 were women who couldn't afford a male doctor's fees, and 1 was a drunk who stumbled into my office by mistake." The bitterness surprised her with its intensity. "I could have stayed, kept fighting, tried to prove myself in a city that didn't want me. Or I could go somewhere that needed doctors more than it needed to discriminate. Hence Jerome Junction." Hence Jerome Junction. Rose realized she was still holding his hand and made herself let go. "Your turn. Why mining? You said you grew up with horses and cattle. That's a far cry from working underground." Quentin leaned back against the wall of the clinic, his eyes distant. "After my parents died, I spent 10 years drifting. Working just enough to eat, moving before I had to care about anything or anyone. It was easier that way. No attachments meant no losses." He paused. "But then I got to Arizona territory and saw these mountains. Something about them just felt solid, permanent. I figured maybe it was time to stop drifting. You wanted roots. I wanted to matter, to be part of something that would last beyond me." He gestured at the mining operations visible on the mountainside. Every ounce of copper that comes out of this mountain goes into telegraph wires, electrical systems, things that are changing the world. I liked being part of that, like knowing my work meant something. Rose understood that desire in her bones. And now I don't know. With Desert Rose shut down and Copper King controlling everything, I'm not sure there's a place for me here anymore. He turned to look at her. What about you? Still think Jerome Junction is where you want to plant your flag? Before Rose could answer, a commotion erupted further up the street. Raised voices, the sound of something heavy hitting the ground. She stood, shading her eyes to see better. A group of miners had gathered outside the Copper King offices, their body language aggressive. As she watched, one of them threw a rock that shattered a window. "That's going to get ugly fast," Quentin said, pushing himself to his feet despite Rose's immediate protest. "Those are Desert Rose men. They just found out about the wage cuts." Sheriff Hutchins appeared, along with 4 deputies Rose had never seen before. They waded into the crowd with clubs drawn and the shouting intensified. Rose saw one miner go down, blood streaming from his head. Then another. The sheriff's men were indiscriminate in their violence, striking anyone within reach. "We need to get inside," Rose said, already moving toward the clinic door. "They're going to need medical attention." "Rose, wait," Quentin caught her arm. "If you treat those men, you'll be taking sides against Copper King. That could mean trouble for you." She looked at him, truly looked, and saw the concern in his eyes. Saw that he was trying to protect her, and felt something warm bloom in her chest even as she shook her head. "I'm a doctor. I don't choose my patients based on politics. Now either help me prepare the clinic or get out of my way." A smile tugged at his mouth, equal parts admiration and exasperation. "Yes, madam." They worked together, clearing space and laying out bandages and instruments. The first miner arrived 10 minutes later, supported by 2 of his friends. He had a gash across his forehead that would need stitches and a broken nose that sat at an unnatural angle. Rose set to work immediately, her hands steady even as her mind cataloged the injustice of it all. The man's name was Thomas. He had 3 children, and he had been protesting peacefully when a deputy's club found his face. More came after Thomas. 7 men in total, ranging from minor cuts to a dislocated shoulder that made Rose grateful for Quentin's strength as he helped her manipulate the joint back into place. She worked through the afternoon, stitching and bandaging and dispensing what little laudanum she could spare for pain. The men were grateful but angry, talking in low voices about organization and resistance. "We can't just accept this," Thomas said as Rose tied off his stitches. "Copper King thinks they can do whatever they want. Someone needs to stand up to them." "Someone needs to not get themselves killed," Rose said firmly. "I'm all for justice, but organized resistance requires planning, not street brawls with the sheriff's men." "She's right," Quentin added from where he was helping another miner clean dried blood from his hands. "Going off half-cocked is just going to get more people hurt. If you want to fight Copper King, you need to be smart about it." The miners exchanged glances. Thomas spoke carefully. "You got ideas about how to be smart about it, Shaw?" Quentin was quiet for a long moment. Rose could see him thinking, weighing options. "Maybe. But first, we need information. We need to know exactly how Copper King pulled off that ambush, who ordered it, and whether we can prove it. Right now, it's just my word against theirs, and my word doesn't carry much weight with Sheriff Hutchins." "You think there's proof somewhere?" "There's always proof if you know where to look. Someone had to plan that ambush, coordinate the timing. Someone at Copper King gave the order and probably paid the men who did it. Money like that leaves a trail." Quentin looked at Rose. "But hunting for that trail is going to take time and resources we don't have." "What we have," Rose said slowly, an idea forming, is a clinic. A place where people come and talk, where information flows. If we're careful and we listen, we might hear something useful. Thomas nodded. Doctor's right. Half the men in Jerome Junction will come through here eventually. People talk when they're hurt, when their guard is down. I'm not asking my patients to spy, Rose said sharply. But if information comes to me in the natural course of treatment, I'd be foolish to ignore it. The miners left as evening fell, each shaking Rose's hand and thanking her. She waved away their attempts to pay, knowing most of them had families to feed and uncertain employment ahead. After the last one departed, she and Quentin were left alone in the clinic, surrounded by bloody bandages and the lingering smell of carbolic acid. You were amazing today, Quentin said quietly. The way you handled all of them, kept calm even when things got chaotic. You're the real thing, Rose. A real doctor. The words shouldn't have meant as much as they did. Rose had her degree, her credentials, her knowledge. She didn't need validation from a cowboy turned miner. But hearing it anyway, spoken with such conviction, made her throat tight. Thank you. I mean it. Philadelphia's loss is Jerome Junction's gain. He moved closer, and Rose found she couldn't step back, didn't want to. You could have turned those men away, avoided taking sides, but you didn't. Neither did you. You're supposed to be resting, not helping relocate shoulders and dispensing strategic advice. Guess we're both stubborn. Quentin reached up, his fingers brushing her cheek with infinite gentleness. Rose. The way he said her name, like a question and an answer at once, made her breath catch. She should step back, maintain professional distance. Remember that he was her patient and she was his doctor. Should. But Rose had spent her entire life doing what she should, following every rule and exceeding every expectation, and where had it gotten her? To an abandoned shack in Arizona territory, alone except for a man with whiskey-colored eyes who looked at her like she hung the moon. This is probably a bad idea, she whispered, even as she swayed closer. Probably. His hand cupped her face, thumb tracing the line of her jaw. Tell me to stop. Rose had never been good at lying. Instead of speaking, she closed the final distance between them and kissed him. It was nothing like the chaste, polite kisses she had experienced at Philadelphia social events. This was heat and hunger, Quentin's mouth moving against hers with an intensity that stole her breath and sparked electricity down her spine. His other hand found her waist, pulling her closer, and Rose went willingly, her fingers tangling in his hair. He tasted like the peppermint tea she had given him that afternoon, and something uniquely him, and she couldn't get enough. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Quentin rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that since the day my fever broke, and I woke up to find you asleep in that chair, still wearing your bloody dress because you wouldn't leave me long enough to change. I've wanted you to do that since you made a joke about making history while bleeding out on my floor. Rose laughed shakily. We really are both stubborn and slightly insane. Slightly. He kissed her again, softer this time, tender in a way that made her chest ache. Rose Adler, you're the most extraordinary woman I've ever met. And if you'll have me, I'd like to be more than just your patient who never left. You're not staying because you have nowhere else to go. I'm staying because everywhere else is wherever you're not. Quentin pulled back enough to meet her eyes. I'm staying because you make me want to be the kind of man who deserves someone like you. I'm staying because for the first time in 10 years, I've found something worth putting down roots for. Rose felt tears prick her eyes, happy tears, overwhelmed tears. I spent 6 years fighting to be taken seriously as a physician. I told myself that was enough, that professional respect was all I needed. But then you walked through my door, and suddenly, I wanted more. Wanted someone who saw all of me, doctor and woman, competent and terrified and valued both equally. I do see you, all of you. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the tip of her nose, and I'm in love with every part. That's good, Rose said, her voice wobbling only slightly, because I'm in love with you too. Even though you're a terrible patient who never follows orders. I'll try to do better, liar. But she was smiling as she said it, and when he kissed her again, she forgot about everything else, the clinic, the mine politics, the uncertain future. There was only this moment, this man, this impossible and perfect feeling of being exactly where she belonged. The next weeks passed in a blur of clinic work and stolen moments. Rose's patient load increased as word spread about the doctor who treated everyone regardless of ability to pay. She set a miner's broken leg, delivered her first Arizona baby at 3 in the morning, diagnosed and treated a case of scarlet fever that could have swept through the town if not caught early. Quentin, despite her protests, helped however he could. He repaired the clinic's roof properly, built shelves for her medical supplies, and constructed a proper examination table that didn't wobble. He was also there on the difficult days, holding her when she lost a patient to consumption, celebrating with her when the scarlet fever patient made a full recovery. They were careful to maintain some appearance of propriety. Quentin slept on a cot he had built for himself, positioned discreetly behind a curtain on the opposite side of the clinic from Rose's bedroll. But propriety only went so far when they were living in close quarters, working side by side, falling more deeply in love with each passing day. Rose learned that Quentin sang off-key when he thought no one was listening, that he was afraid of spiders but not rattlesnakes, that his hands were capable of astonishing gentleness. Quentin learned that Rose talked to herself when solving difficult diagnostic problems, that she had read every novel by Charles Dickens at least twice, that she made the worst coffee in Arizona territory, but refused to admit it. One evening, about 6 weeks after Quentin had first stumbled through her door, Frank Morrison returned to the clinic. He found them outside, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of orange and purple. "Got some news," Frank said without preamble. "One of my former workers, man named Pete Dalton, came to me today, said his conscience was bothering him." Quentin straightened. "What did he say?" "That he was drinking at the Copper King saloon the night before the ambush. Heard 2 men talking about a job they'd been hired for intercepting a payroll delivery on the Prescott Road. Pete didn't think much of it at the time, figured it was just drunk talk. But after everything that happened, he started putting pieces together." Frank pulled a folded paper from his pocket. He wrote down everything he remembered, names, details, the fact that they mentioned being paid by someone high up at Copper King. Rose felt her heart rate pick up. "That's evidence. Real evidence." "It's hearsay," Quentin said, but there was hope in his voice. "Would it hold up in court?" "Maybe not on its own, but it's a starting place." Frank handed the paper to Quentin. "Pete also said one of the men mentioned spending his payment money at the general store, buying fancy goods to send back to his wife in Tucson. If we can find the purchase records, connect them to someone who works for Copper King, we might have enough to convince a judge to investigate." "Sheriff Hutchins won't do anything with this," Rose said. "He's in Copper King's pocket. Which is why I sent a telegram to the territorial marshal in Prescott, explained the situation and asked for an outside investigation." Frank allowed himself a small smile. "Marshal Thompson is an old friend. He owes me a favor or two. If I can give him solid evidence of theft and attempted murder, he'll come." Quentin studied the paper, his expression intense. "We need those purchase records. The general store is owned by Samuel Winters. He keeps detailed ledgers, notes every transaction." He also works closely with Copper King. They're his biggest customers. Rose could see where this was going and didn't like it. He's not going to just hand over his records. No, but he might be persuaded if the request comes from the right person. Quentin looked at her. Dr. Adler, doesn't Samuel Winters have a wife who's been complaining of stomach pains? Rose thought back through her patient records. Martha Winters. Yes, she came to see me 2 weeks ago. I diagnosed chronic indigestion and gave her dietary recommendations. Has she been back for a follow-up? Not yet, but I suggested she return if the symptoms persisted. Rose caught on to his plan. You want me to make a house call, use it as an opportunity to get close to the ledgers. I want you to check on your patient's health. What you happen to observe during a professional visit is none of my business. Quentin's expression was carefully neutral. But if you did happen to notice anything relevant in those ledgers, say during a moment when Samuel was distracted helping his wife to bed, well, that would be pure coincidence. You're asking me to abuse my position as a physician. I'm asking you to use every tool at your disposal to help bring criminals to justice. Quentin moved to stand in front of her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. But if you're uncomfortable with this, we'll find another way. I would never ask you to compromise your ethics. Rose thought about the miners who had come through her clinic, beaten by the sheriff's men for daring to protest unfair wages. Thought about Quentin, nearly dying on her floor because of corporate greed. Thought about the future of Jerome Junction, and whether it would be a place where justice mattered or only money. I'll do it. But I'm doing it because Martha Winters is my patient and deserves a follow-up visit. What I observe is simply part of being thorough. The next afternoon, Rose arrived at the Winters home carrying her medical bag and a basket of chamomile tea, which she had found helpful for digestive complaints. Martha greeted her with surprised gratitude and ushered her inside. Samuel was there, suspicious until Rose explained she was simply checking on his wife's condition as any good physician would. The examination was legitimate. Rose took her time, asking detailed questions about Martha's symptoms and diet, observing that the indigestion had worsened despite following the previous recommendations. I think we need to consider a more restricted diet, she said, pulling out her notebook to write detailed instructions. Martha, could you show me what you typically eat for breakfast? Sometimes seeing the actual foods helps me be more specific. While Martha led her to the kitchen, chattering about her various meals, Rose's eyes swept the front room where Samuel remained. The ledgers were there, stacked on a desk in the corner. She would need Samuel out of the room even for just a few minutes. Martha, how has your sleep been? Rose asked, an idea forming. Sometimes digestive issues can worsen with poor sleep posture. Terrible lately. I wake up with such aches in my back. Would you mind showing me your bedroom? I'd like to check how your mattress is supporting you. Samuel, Rose called into the next room, could you help your wife up the stairs? I want to observe how she's moving. Samuel grumbled but complied, supporting Martha as they climbed the stairs to the second floor. The moment they were out of sight, Rose moved quickly to the desk. The ledgers were organized by month. She flipped to the relevant dates, running her finger down the entries. They're a large purchase on the day after the ambush. Expensive fabric, imported whiskey, all purchased by a man named Jack Brennan. The address listed was the Copper King bunkhouse. Rose committed the details to memory, then returned to the kitchen just as Samuel and Martha came back downstairs. She spent another 20 minutes providing legitimate medical advice, left the chamomile tea with detailed brewing instructions, and made her exit feeling like her heart might pound out of her chest. Quentin was waiting at the clinic, pacing anxiously. Well, Jack Brennan. Copper King employee, lives in their bunkhouse. made a large purchase of luxury goods the day after the ambush, far more than a miner's wages would support. Rose set down her medical bag, her hands shaking slightly with the adrenaline. I saw it in the ledger, clear as day. Quentin pulled her into a fierce hug. You're brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. I'm terrified I just committed some kind of medical ethics violation. You provided thorough patient care that happened to include environmental observation. He kissed the top of her head. That's not a violation. That's being a good doctor. Frank, when informed of the discovery, immediately sent another telegram to Marshal Thompson with the new information. The reply came 2 days later. The marshal would arrive within the week to conduct an official investigation. Those days were tense. Rose continued her normal clinic work, but she could feel the eyes of Copper King on her, a prickling awareness that her house call to the Winters home had been noted and perhaps questioned. Quentin stayed close, his presence both comforting and concerning. She didn't want him in danger because of her. I can take care of myself, she told him on the third night, when she caught him checking the clinic's locks for the 5th time. I know you can. Doesn't mean I'm going to stop worrying. He settled beside her on the bench outside, the night air cool after the day's heat. Rose, I've been thinking about the future. What about it, about our future? He took her hand, his thumb tracing familiar circles on her palm. Once this business with Copper King is settled one way or another, I want to do things properly. Want to court you the way you deserve, out in the open where everyone can see. Want to marry you if you'll have me. Rose's breath caught. Quentin Shaw, are you proposing? Not officially. Not yet. Can't propose without a ring, and I intend to get you a proper one. His eyes were serious in the moonlight. But I'm telling you my intentions. I'm telling you that I love you and I want to build a life with you, here in Jerome Junction or wherever else you want to go. I'm telling you that you're it for me, Rose Adler. You're everything. I want that too, Rose whispered, tears spilling over despite her best efforts to contain them. I want all of it, the courtship and the marriage and the life together. I want to wake up next to you every morning and work beside you every day and fall asleep in your arms every night. I want to be yours and have you be mine, completely and officially. Then that's what we'll do. He kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. Soon as I can get a ring and we can find someone to perform the ceremony, I'm making you Mrs. Shaw. Mrs. Rose Adler Shaw, she corrected. I didn't fight this hard to become a doctor just to lose my name. Quentin laughed, the sound rich and warm. Mrs. Rose Adler Shaw, I like it. Has a nice ring to it. Marshal Thompson arrived on a Thursday, riding into Jerome Junction with 2 deputies and an air of no-nonsense authority that made Sheriff Hutchins visibly nervous. He was a tall man in his late 50s, with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. Frank Morrison met him at the edge of town and brought him directly to Rose's clinic. Dr. Adler, I presume, the marshal said, removing his hat as he entered. Frank's told me quite a bit about you, and you must be Quentin Shaw, Marshal. Quentin shook his hand. Thank you for coming. Let's see if I'm thanking you by the end of this. Frank, you said you had evidence of theft and attempted murder. I'm going to need to see everything you've got. They spread it all out on Rose's examination table. Pete Dalton's written statement about the conversation he'd overheard. Rose's testimony about the ledger entry showing Jack Brennan's suspicious purchase. Quentin's account of the ambush itself, the 3 bullets Rose had extracted and saved in a labeled jar. Frank's documentation of the missing payroll and the subsequent forced sale of Desert Rose. Marshal Thompson examined each piece carefully, asking detailed questions and taking notes in a leather-bound book. After nearly an hour, he sat back. It's not ironclad, but it's enough to justify bringing Jack Brennan in for questioning. If he breaks, We might be able to connect this all the way up to whoever ordered the hit. He looked at Quentin. You up for identifying the men who shot you? Absolutely. Good. We'll do this tomorrow, nice and public, so everyone in Jerome Junction can see that territorial law still means something here. The marshal stood, settling his hat back on his head. In the meantime, I suggest you both stay close to people you trust. If Copper King gets wind that we're moving on this, they might try to tie up loose ends. That night, Rose and Quentin didn't even pretend to sleep in separate areas of the clinic. They lay together on her bedroll, Rose's head on Quentin's chest, his arms wrapped protectively around her. Are you afraid? She asked quietly. Terrified, he admitted. Not for me, but for you. If this goes wrong, if Copper King decides you're a threat, then they'll have to deal with the territorial marshal, the entire population of former Desert Rose miners, and one very angry doctor. Rose tilted her head to look at him. We're doing the right thing, Quentin. That has to count for something. In a just world, it would count for everything, but we don't live in a just world. No, but we live in a world where people like us can fight to make it more just. That's not nothing. She kissed his jaw, his neck, the hollow of his throat. Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that these past weeks with you have been the happiest of my life. You make me believe in possibilities I'd given up on. Quentin's arms tightened around her. I was half dead when I stumbled into your clinic. You didn't just save my life, Rose. You gave me a reason to live it. Whatever happens tomorrow, that's not going to change. I'm yours, completely and forever. They held each other through the night, talking in whispers about dreams and plans and the future they would build together. By the time dawn broke, Rose felt steady, centered, ready to face whatever came. The confrontation happened at noon in the center of town. Marshal Thompson, flanked by his deputies, walked into the Copper King offices and emerged 10 minutes later with Jack Brennan in handcuffs. A crowd had gathered, miners and townspeople drawn by the spectacle of territorial law enforcement in action. This man is wanted for questioning in connection with armed robbery and attempted murder, the marshal announced, his voice carrying across the square. Anyone with information about the ambush of Quentin Shaw on the Prescott Road is encouraged to come forward. Jack Brennan was a rough-looking man in his 40s, his face weathered and his eyes hard. He said nothing as the marshal read out the charges, but Rose saw fear flicker across his expression when Quentin stepped forward. That's one of them, Quentin said clearly. He was the one who shot me first, aimed for my chest. Would have killed me if I hadn't moved at the last second. You're lying, Brennan snarled. I don't know what he's talking about, Marshal. I wasn't anywhere near the Prescott Road that day. Funny thing about that, Marshal Thompson said mildly. According to the general store ledgers, you made a purchase of luxury goods the very next day. Goods that cost more than 3 months of a miner's wages. Where'd you get that kind of money, Mr. Brennan? Brennan's face went white. I had savings. Really? Because according to Copper King's own payroll records, which I've already subpoenaed, you were behind on your boarding house fees. Doesn't sound like a man with savings to me. The marshal leaned in closer. Here's what I think happened. I think someone at Copper King paid you and 2 other men to ambush Mr. Shaw and steal the Desert Rose payroll. I think that money came from high enough up the chain that it never showed on the official books. And I think if you're smart, you'll tell me who gave the order before I charge you with everything and let you hang alone. The crowd had grown silent, every person straining to hear. Rose felt Quentin's hand find hers, his grip tight. Brennan looked around wildly, searching for help that wasn't coming. His eyes landed on the Copper King offices, where several well-dressed men had emerged to watch the proceedings. One of them, A portly man Rose recognized as the mine superintendent gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head. That tiny gesture seemed to break something in Brennan. His shoulders sagged. "I want a deal, protection and reduced charges in exchange for testimony. That can be arranged, depending on what you have to tell me." Marshal Thompson gestured to his deputies. "Take him to my office. We'll talk there." The interrogation took 3 hours. Rose and Quentin waited at the clinic with Frank Morrison, none of them able to focus on anything other than what might be happening across town. When the marshal finally arrived, his expression was grim but satisfied. "Got a full confession." Jack Brennan and 2 other men, brothers named Carl and Joe Hutchins, were hired by Copper King's mine superintendent, Robert Whitmore, to intercept the payroll delivery and eliminate any witnesses. They were paid $500 each, with the promise of more if they succeeded in bankrupting Desert Rose. Marshal Thompson accepted the cup of coffee Rose poured him. Brennan rolled on everyone involved. "The Hutchins brothers are in custody, and I've issued a warrant for Whitmore's arrest." "The Hutchins brothers," Frank repeated slowly. "Any relation to our sheriff, sons, which explains why Sheriff Hutchins was so reluctant to investigate." The marshal's smile was cold. "I've already sent a telegram to the territorial governor requesting the sheriff's suspension pending investigation into corruption charges." Rose felt dizzy with relief and disbelief. "It's really over. Copper King will face justice. The individuals involved will face justice. As for the company itself, that's trickier. Whitmore acted outside his authority, used his own money to hire the killers. Copper King's lawyers will argue the company can't be held responsible for one rogue employee's actions." The marshal set down his coffee cup. "But here's the thing. Once this all comes out in trial, once people see the lengths Copper King was willing to go to eliminate competition, their reputation is going to take a serious hit. And Frank, that might give you some leverage to renegotiate the terms of Desert Rose's sale." Frank's eyes lit up. "You think I could get the mine back? I think you could make a compelling argument that the sale was made under duress, given that the duress was deliberately manufactured by the buyer through illegal means. Get yourself a good lawyer and you might have a case." The implications began to sink in. Justice for Quentin, accountability for corruption, and possibly the restoration of Desert Rose. It was more than Rose had dared to hope for. Over the following weeks, Jerome Junction transformed. The trial of Jack Brennan and the Hutchins brothers became territorial news, reporters arriving from as far as Tucson to cover the scandal. Robert Whitmore was found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and theft, sentenced to 20 years in territorial prison. Sheriff Hutchins resigned in disgrace before he could be formally removed from office. And Frank Morrison, armed with a lawyer who specialized in contract law, successfully argued that the sale of Desert Rose had been obtained through fraud and coercion. Copper King, desperate to avoid further scandal, agreed to sell the mine back to Frank for the original purchase price. Through it all, Rose continued her work at the clinic. Her patient load grew as more townspeople came to trust the woman doctor who had helped bring criminals to justice. She hired an assistant, a young woman named Sarah who had nursing training and a fierce desire to learn. The clinic expanded into the building next door, which had previously housed a failed saloon. Quentin, officially hired back by Desert Rose as mine supervisor, helped with the construction work, building proper examination rooms and a small surgery. One evening in late October, as the Arizona air finally began to cool from summer's relentless heat, Quentin took Rose's hand and led her outside. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold that reflected off the mountains like fire. "Close your eyes," he said. "Quentin, what are you doing? Just trust me. Close your eyes." When she complied, he guided her down the street, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Okay, you can look now." Rose opened her eyes to find herself standing in front of a half-built house. It wasn't large, but it was well constructed, with solid stone foundations and walls that would withstand Arizona's extremes of heat and cold. Through the empty doorway, she could see the layout: a main room, what looked like 2 bedrooms and space for a kitchen. "I've been working on it in my spare time," Quentin said, and Rose heard nervousness in his voice. "Frank gave me a piece of land as a bonus for the mine expansion plans I drew up. I thought maybe we could use it together." "Quentin." Rose's voice came out choked with emotion. "There's more." He took both her hands, and Rose saw that he was trembling slightly. "I went to Prescott last week, told you I was consulting about mineral rights, and but I also did this." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "Rose Adler, I know we've only known each other a few months. I know by all reasonable standards we should wait longer, be more practical. But I've never been good at reasonable, and I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. You're my home. The place I want to return to at the end of every day and wake up to every morning. You're the reason I stopped drifting and started building. So I'm asking, properly this time, with a ring and a house and all my heart, will you marry me?" He opened the box, revealing a simple gold band set with a small but perfect sapphire that caught the dying light and threw blue sparks. Rose couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but nod emphatically, tears streaming down her face as Quentin slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, like it had been made for her, like everything about this man and this moment had been designed to align with the deepest desires of her heart. "Yes," she finally managed to say. "Yes, yes, yes. 1,000 times yes." Quentin lifted her off the ground, spinning her in a circle as they both laughed and cried. When he set her down, he kissed her with a tenderness that made her feel cherished and a passion that made her feel alive. And standing there in front of their unfinished house, watching the sun set over the mountains of Arizona territory, Rose knew she had found something more valuable than any amount of copper. She had found home. They married on a crisp November morning, under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Rose wore a dress of cream silk that Sarah had helped her sew, simple but elegant, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Quentin wore his best suit, looking handsome enough that Rose forgot to breathe for a moment when she first saw him waiting at the altar. The ceremony took place outside the clinic, in a space that had become the town square, with half of Jerome Junction in attendance. Frank Morrison gave Rose away, having appointed himself her honorary father figure. Sarah stood as her bridesmaid, beaming with excitement. And when the circuit judge who rode through once a month asked if anyone objected to the union, the silence was absolute except for the wind moving through the juniper trees. "I do," Rose said when prompted, her voice clear and strong. "I do," Quentin echoed, his eyes never leaving hers. "Then by the power vested in me by Arizona territory, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Quentin did, thoroughly and enthusiastically, to the cheers and applause of everyone present. Rose kissed him back, pouring every ounce of love and joy and gratitude into it, not caring that they had an audience or that she was supposed to be ladylike and reserved. This was her husband, her partner, her home, and she wanted the whole world to know it. The reception was held at the newly reopened Desert Rose Saloon, which Frank had purchased and converted into a respectable establishment that served food along with drinks. There was music and dancing, toasts that ranged from heartfelt to bawdy, and a cake that Sarah had baked with considerably more enthusiasm than skill. Rose didn't care that the frosting was lopsided or that the fiddler played slightly off-key. She danced with Quentin, with Frank, with miners who had become friends and patients who had become family. She danced until her feet ached and her face hurt from smiling. As the party wound down and the stars came out in full glory, Quentin took her hand and led her away from the celebration, back to their house. It was finished now, completed just in time for the wedding. Someone Rose suspected Sarah, and a group of conspirators had decorated it with ribbons and flowers, and a fire burned in the new hearth, warming the main room. "Welcome home, Mrs. Adler Shaw," Quentin said, lifting her over the threshold with ease despite her laughing protests. "Welcome home, Mr. Shaw," Rose responded, kissing him as he set her down. "Though I should warn you, I have no idea how to be a conventional wife. I'm going to keep working at the clinic, keep being a doctor, keep being myself." "Good. I didn't fall in love with conventional." Quentin pulled her close, his hands gentle on her waist. "I fell in love with brilliant, stubborn, extraordinary Rose Adler, and that's exactly who I want to be married to. Doctor, healer, woman who saves lives and changes minds. I'll support every part of who you are. Even the part that makes terrible coffee, especially that part. Someone has to keep me humble." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "I love you, Rose, every impossible, wonderful piece of you. I love you too." Rose reached up to cup his face, marveling at the fact that this man was hers, that this life was real. "Thank you for stumbling through my clinic door. Thank you for staying. Thank you for choosing me. Always, Rose, always." That night, in the house they had built together, Rose and Quentin began their married life with a tenderness and passion that spoke of deep love and complete trust. And in the morning, when the Arizona sun streamed through their bedroom window and Rose woke in her husband's arms, she knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The years that followed were full and rich, marked by work and love in equal measure. Rose's clinic thrived, expanding to include 2 additional physicians she recruited from medical schools back east. She gained a reputation throughout Arizona territory as a skilled surgeon and diagnostician, and her published papers on treating altitude sickness and mining injuries were widely circulated in medical journals. Women began traveling to Jerome Junction specifically to be treated by her, and Rose took particular satisfaction in training other female physicians who came to study under her guidance. Quentin advanced to mine manager at Desert Rose, implementing safety protocols and efficiency improvements that made the operation one of the most successful in the territory. But he never forgot where he had come from, never lost sight of the fact that a mine was only as good as the men who worked it. He fought for fair wages, safe conditions, and dignity for every worker. And when Desert Rose struck a massive new copper vein in 1880, he insisted that the windfall profits be shared with the employees who had helped discover it. Together, Rose and Quentin became pillars of Jerome Junction. They advocated for a proper school, which opened in 1882 with Rose on the board of trustees. They pushed for improved sanitation and public health measures, dramatically reducing the incidence of cholera and typhoid in the town. They opened their home to friends and strangers alike, hosting dinners where miners sat beside mine owners, and everyone was expected to treat each other with respect. In the spring of 1883, Rose discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She had delivered dozens of babies by then, but carrying one herself was entirely different. Quentin was overjoyed and immediately became impossibly protective, trying to insist she reduce her clinic hours and avoid anything strenuous. "I'm pregnant, not fragile," Rose told him firmly when he tried to carry her medical bag for the third time in one day. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of humanity. I'm perfectly capable of working." I know, I just worry." Quentin's hand rested gently on her still flat stomach. "That's my child in there, and my wife. I'm allowed to worry." "You're allowed to worry quietly while supporting my professional autonomy," Rose said, but she softened the words with a kiss. "I promise I'll be careful. But I'm not stopping my work just because I'm expecting." True to her word, Rose continued at the clinic throughout her pregnancy, only reducing her hours in the final month when her expanding belly made surgery impractical. Sarah and the other physicians covered her cases with competence and care, and Rose spent her enforced rest writing a comprehensive manual on obstetric practices in frontier conditions. Their son was born on a cold January night in 1884, arriving with a lusty cry that proclaimed his health to the entire household. They named him Thomas, after Rose's father who had eventually come to support her medical career, and James, after Quentin's father. Thomas James Shaw was perfect, with his father's golden eyes and his mother's stubborn chin, and holding him for the first time, Rose felt her heart expand in ways she hadn't known were possible. Quentin cried when he held his son, tears streaming down his face as he marveled at the tiny fingers and the shock of dark hair. "He's perfect. Rose, we made something perfect." "We did," Rose agreed, exhausted and exhilarated and more in love with her husband than she had thought possible. "We really did." Parenthood changed them in subtle ways. Quentin became even more invested in making Jerome Junction a safe, thriving community, his motivation now extending to the world his son would inherit. Rose found herself understanding her patients who were mothers with new depth, the visceral fear and fierce love they described now intimately familiar. But they didn't lose themselves in parenting. They remained partners, supporting each other's work and dreams while building a family. Thomas was 2 when Rose discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, her body knowing what to expect. Their daughter arrived in the summer of 1886, during a heat wave that made even the nights uncomfortable. They named her Clara Mee, and she came into the world quietly, her dark eyes alert and curious from the first moment. With 2 children, their house felt perfectly full. Rose and Quentin had added a second story, creating more bedrooms and a study where Rose could work on her medical writing. The clinic had expanded again, now occupying 3 connected buildings and employing 6 physicians, 12 nurses, and support staff. Jerome Junction had grown too, its population swelling past 5,000 as the mines continued to produce wealth and opportunity. But growth brought challenges. In 1887, a smallpox outbreak threatened to devastate the town. Rose immediately organized a vaccination campaign, going door to door herself despite Quentin's worries about her exposure. She worked 16-hour days, tracking cases, isolating the sick, and fighting to save every patient she could. The outbreak was contained within 6 weeks, with a mortality rate far lower than similar epidemics in other frontier towns. The territorial governor sent a personal letter of commendation, and Rose's methods were studied by public health officials across the West. Through it all, Quentin was her anchor. He managed the household when she was consumed with crisis, took care of the children when she couldn't, and never once suggested she should sacrifice her work for conventional domesticity. In the evenings, after Thomas and Clara were asleep, they would sit together on the porch of their home and talk about everything and nothing. These moments of quiet connection sustained them through the chaos of their public lives. "You ever regret it?" Rose asked one night in the summer of 1888, watching fireflies dance in the darkness. The chaos, the constant work, the lack of normal domestic tranquility. Never, Quentin said without hesitation. This life, our life, is exactly what I want. You, the children, the work we do, the difference we make. How could I regret any of that? Some men would want a wife who stayed home, who didn't work 14-hour days or come home covered in other people's blood. Then some men are fools. Quentin pulled her close, his arm around her shoulders. Rose, you're extraordinary. You save lives, you change minds, you make the world better just by being in it. Why would I want anything less than all of that? I love you, Rose said, the words never losing their power no matter how many times she spoke them. I love you too. Always have, always will. The years continued to pass, marked by growth and change. Thomas grew into a thoughtful boy who loved books and showed an early interest in geology, often accompanying his father to the mines to study rock formations. Clara was fearless and curious, constantly getting into mischief and asking questions about everything. Rose watched them grow with wonder and pride, seeing pieces of herself and Quentin in each child while also recognizing their unique, individual spirits. In 1892, Arizona Territory officially recognized women's right to practice medicine without additional restrictions, a change Rose had lobbied for extensively. She celebrated by expanding the clinic's training program, creating formal residencies for new physicians regardless of gender. The Rose Adler Shaw Medical Institute became known throughout the West as a place where competence mattered more than convention. Quentin, meanwhile, had become one of the most respected mining engineers in the territory. His innovations in safety and efficiency were adopted by operations across Arizona, Nevada, and New Mexico. But he turned down numerous offers to move to larger cities or more prestigious positions. Jerome Junction was home, and he had no interest in leaving it. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Quentin surprised Rose with a trip to San Francisco. They left Thomas and Clara with Sarah, now a close family friend who had married Frank Morrison in a wedding almost as joyful as their own, and traveled to the coast. It was Rose's first time seeing the ocean, and she stood on the beach for an hour, marveling at the endless expanse of water. "It's so different from the desert," she said, watching waves crash against the shore. "You like it?" Quentin stood behind her, his arms wrapped around her waist. "I love it, but it makes me appreciate home even more." Rose leaned back against him. "The desert is harsh, but it's ours. We've built something real there." "We have." Quentin kissed the top of her head. "And we're going to keep building." Growing old together in Jerome Junction, watching our children grow, maybe eventually watching grandchildren grow. A whole life, Rose. That's what I want with you. A whole life, Rose echoed, turning in his arms to face him. At 39, she had gray threading through her dark hair and lines around her eyes from years of squinting at medical texts and Arizona sunshine. But Quentin looked at her like she was still the young woman who had saved his life in an abandoned shack, and she felt beautiful. "I want that too." Every moment of it. They spent a week in San Francisco, attending theater performances and dining at restaurants where the menu was in French and the waiters wore white gloves. It was wonderful and exotic and utterly foreign. And while Rose enjoyed the experience, she also felt relief when they boarded the train back to Arizona. The sophistication of San Francisco couldn't compete with the raw honesty of home. Thomas was 12 and Clara 10 when Rose realized she was pregnant again. The news was unexpected. She was 42, Quentin 44, and they had assumed their family was complete. But after the initial shock faded, joy took its place. Another child, another blessing, another chance to experience the miracle of new life. This pregnancy was harder than the previous two. Rose's body was older, less resilient, and complications arose that she recognized with a physician's clarity as serious. She developed preeclampsia in her 7th month, her blood pressure dangerously high and her extremities swelling. On her own orders, she was confined to bed rest, a special torture for someone accustomed to constant activity. Quentin was terrified, barely leaving her side. Thomas and Clara tried to help, bringing her books and keeping her company, their young faces creased with worry. Rose did her best to remain calm, to explain in age-appropriate terms what was happening, but privately she was afraid. She had seen too many women die from complications like these. In her 8th month, the decision was made to deliver early. Rose's colleague, Dr. Ellen Martinez, performed the cesarean section, a procedure still relatively rare and dangerous in 1898. Rose was conscious throughout, her medical training making it impossible not to catalog every step of the surgery being performed on her own body. Their second son was born tiny but alive, his cry weak but present. They named him Samuel Robert Shaw, and for 3 days his survival hung in the balance. Rose, recovering from surgery and still fighting preeclampsia, could only watch as the clinic's physicians worked to keep her youngest child alive. But Samuel was a fighter, as stubborn as both his parents. He grew stronger day by day, his cries becoming louder and his grip firmer. By the time Rose was well enough to hold him properly, he had already proven he intended to survive against all odds. Just like his mother, Quentin said, watching Rose nurse their son with wonder in his eyes, refusing to give up even when everything seems impossible. Just like both his parents, Rose corrected. You stumbled into my clinic with 3 bullet wounds and somehow survived. This family doesn't know how to quit. Recovery was slow. Rose was 43 and had been through significant medical trauma. It took months before she felt strong enough to return to the clinic, and even then, she worked reduced hours. For the first time in her medical career, she felt the limitations of age and body, and it frustrated her even as she accepted it. But there were compensations. More time with her children, particularly baby Samuel, who demanded constant attention. More quiet evenings with Quentin, the two of them watching the sunset from their porch while Samuel slept between them. More opportunity to mentor the younger physicians at the clinic, passing on knowledge accumulated over 2 decades of practice. Thomas left for university in 1899, heading to the Colorado School of Mines to study geology. Rose cried when the stagecoach pulled away. Even though she was proud beyond measure of the thoughtful young man her son had become. Clara, at 13, was already declaring her intention to become a physician like her mother, spending hours at the clinic observing procedures and asking relentless questions. And Samuel, defying the early predictions, grew into a healthy, energetic toddler who kept everyone constantly busy. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1898, the town of Jerome Junction threw a celebration in their honor. The whole community turned out, from miners to mine owners, from longtime residents to recent arrivals. Speaker after speaker rose to thank Rose and Quentin for their contributions to the town, the clinic that served everyone, the mine safety improvements that had saved countless lives, the school they had helped establish, the community they had helped build. Rose stood beside her husband on a makeshift stage, overwhelmed by the outpouring of affection and gratitude. When it was her turn to speak, she found herself struggling for words. 20 years ago, she finally said, I arrived in Jerome Junction with 2 trunks, $43, and a desperate hope that competence might matter more than convention. I opened a clinic in an abandoned shack, and my first patient was a cowboy who'd been shot 3 times. She looked at Quentin, who was watching her with the same love and admiration he'd shown from the beginning. That cowboy never left, and I'm grateful for it every single day. Because Quentin didn't just become my husband. He became my partner in building something that matters. And this town, all of you, you've been part of that building too, so thank you for giving me a chance when others wouldn't, for trusting me with your health and your lives, for becoming my home. The applause was thunderous. Rose saw patients she had treated, children she had delivered now grown into young adults, families she had helped through crisis and celebration. She had come to Jerome Junction alone, driven by necessity and determination. But somewhere along the way, she had found not just a practice but a purpose, not just a husband but a partner, not just a house but a home. The years continued as they always do. Thomas graduated and returned to Jerome Junction to work at Desert Rose, implementing new mining techniques that made the operation even more successful. Clara attended medical school in Philadelphia, walking the same halls her mother had walked decades earlier, and returned with her degree to join the clinic staff. Samuel, the surprise blessing, grew into a kind and thoughtful boy with his father's gift for reading the land and his mother's compassionate heart. Rose and Quentin aged together, their bodies showing the marks of time and hard work but their love remaining constant. They had fights and disagreements, moments of frustration and exhaustion. But they also had laughter and joy, quiet mornings and passionate nights, the deep comfort of knowing another person completely and being known in return. In 1910, when Rose was 54 and Quentin 56, they celebrated the opening of a new hospital in Jerome Junction, a modern facility with 20 beds and the latest medical equipment. Rose had fought for its funding for 5 years, arguing before the territorial legislature and private donors until she secured the necessary resources. The hospital was named after her, despite her protests, and at the dedication ceremony, the governor himself came to speak. Dr. Rose Adler Shaw represents the very best of Arizona territory, he said to the assembled crowd. For 32 years, she has served this community with skill, compassion, and unwavering dedication. She has trained a generation of physicians, saved countless lives, and proven that competence and character matter far more than outdated prejudices. This hospital stands as a testament to her vision, and her refusal to accept that good enough is good enough. Standing beside Quentin, holding his hand as she had for 3 decades, Rose felt the weight of her life's work settle over her like a comfortable blanket. She had wanted to matter, to make a difference, to be taken seriously as a physician. And she had achieved all of that, not through compromise or conformity, but by staying true to herself and her calling. That night, in the home they had built together, Rose and Quentin sat on their porch and watched the stars emerge in the vast Arizona sky. Samuel, now 12, had fallen asleep inside after an energetic day at the hospital dedication. Thomas and Clara had stayed in town, celebrating with friends and colleagues. "We did it," Rose said quietly. "Everything we dreamed of building, we built." "We did," Quentin agreed. His hair was silver now, his face lined, but his eyes were still the color of whiskey and sunlight, and they still looked at her with absolute devotion. "And we're not done yet. Still got years ahead of us, still got work to do. Still got life to live," Rose added, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Still got each other. Always each other." Quentin's arm came around her shoulders, holding her close. "Rose Adler Shaw, you're the best decision I ever made, the best thing that ever happened to me. You stumbled bleeding through my door because you'd been shot 3 times. That's hardly a decision. Staying was the decision. Falling in love was the decision. Choosing you every day for 32 years was the decision. He kissed the top of her head. Best decision of my life. Rose thought about that abandoned shack where it had all started, now long gone and replaced by the sprawling medical complex that bore her name. Thought about the terrified young doctor she had been, desperate to prove herself. Thought about the journey from there to here, the challenges overcome and the joy discovered. Mine too. Absolutely and completely, mine too. They sat together as the night deepened, comfortable in the silence and in each other's presence. Tomorrow would bring new patience, new challenges, new moments of triumph and struggle. But tonight, there was only this. Two people who had found each other against all odds, built a life against all expectations, and loved each other through everything that life had thrown their way. The story that had begun with blood on a clinic floor had become a love story, a success story, a testament to the power of determination and the strength of partnership. And it was far from over. Rose and Quentin would continue working, loving, building for many years to come. Their children would have children, and those children would hear the story of how their grandmother opened a clinic in an abandoned shack, and their grandfather was her first patient and never left. It was a good story, a true story. And most importantly, it was their story, one they had written together, word by word, day by day, choice by choice, for more than 3 decades and counting. As the stars wheeled overhead and the Arizona night wrapped around them like a familiar embrace, Rose Adler Shaw and Quentin Shaw sat together on the porch of their home, exactly where they belonged, exactly where they had always been meant to be. Together. Always together.